back again with Timmy the Toolman and Sean, and this is a continuation of what we did last week, which was do an inspection of our ball joints by using a pry bar underneath the tire to see if there was any gross play. What we mentioned in that footage is that factory service spec says that 0.5 millimeters is acceptable, so we know we're not going to be able to see 0.5 millimeters in what we were doing. And there's been enough failures of lower ball joints in these third generation Toyota 4Runners and Tacomas that a lot of people, for just peace of mind and preventative maintenance, are just replacing them. My truck has 140,000 miles and I'm going to do just that. Even though I didn't see any gross movement in the ball joint, I'm going to replace it anyways, just for peace of mind. I got information from the factory service manual, which I have a 2000 Toyota SR5 four-wheel drive. I found information in the suspension and axle part of the book. This page number might not pertain to yours if you have a different year, but if you have 2000, it's SA73. And so it explains the steps where you remove the 4 bolts that hold it, hold the ball joint on, and you just loosen them, not taking them all the way apart. Then you break free the outer tie rod, remove that. And then you can remove the lower castle nut that attaches the ball joint to the lower control arm and break that free. And then you could take the 4 bolts out, lift up our upper knuckle and remove the ball joint and put the new one in. And here's some information that I wrote down on a 3x5 card. So I wrote down all the torque specs, the outer tie rod castle nut that attaches it to the steering knuckle, 67 foot-pounds. The 4 ball joint bolts are 59 foot-pounds. The castle nut that attaches the ball joint to the lower control arm is 105 foot-pounds. The front wheel lugs down is 83 foot-pounds. And here's the part numbers. The right ball joint is right here. The left ball joint is the next number. The bolts, it's up to you whether you want to replace the bolts. I heard that some failures were due to the bolts shearing off, so I decided that part of this repair or preventative maintenance, I was going to replace the 8 bolts. So that's the part number for the bolts. The castle nut part number is the last one on the list, and you really don't need the castle nut, so you do not need to order the castle nuts because they come with the ball joint. And so the ball joint, this is the left ball joint here, and this is the right ball joint. And again, it comes with the castle nut and the cotter pin that you need. And here's the bolts. And we'll just make sure we match those up to make sure I did get the right bolts. I got this information off toyota4runner.org, and so I'll just make sure these bolts match up with the original ones. And then here's the price I paid. So Camelback Toyota is a pretty well-known online parts seller that has good prices. They don't charge you much for shipping, and so I suggest you save yourself money and use a seller like Camelback Toyota or another online parts dealer instead of going directly to the dealer, because you'll save some money. In order to make this video a little bit more usable for everybody, instead of doing everything with my cordless impact gun that I bought from DeWalt, I'm going to show one side doing it with traditional tools with a breaker bar, 1/2-inch drive sockets, and then I'll do the other side with the DeWalt and you'll see how much easier it is. Some of the other tools we're going to be using is I bought this OTC front end service kit. It's $62.95 and it's got some pretty good pullers in it. The pullers that I found that are going to work for this application is the Pitman arm puller to break free the ball joint from the lower control arm, and then I'm going to use the Pitman arm tie rod end puller to break free the outer tie rod. And here they are right here. So this is the Pitman arm puller right here, tie rod puller. So those are the two we're going to be using. You could also, if you don't have access to these, you can rent them from auto parts store like O'Reilly's or AutoZone. I'm sure you'll be able to find the right ones that will fit for this application. So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy a kit like this. I just decided to do it because I like having my own tools. And also you can do the other method where you hammer on the knuckle with a hammer, but I choose to pull things off with a puller instead of hammering on the suspension parts. So the prep that we did for the truck before we start working underneath it is we have it jacked up. Frame is being supported by 6-ton jack stands on both sides of the frame, and if you want as a backup, you could just keep the hydraulic jack in place like so. We also have The rear wheel's chalked, so the truck is not going to move on us if you were on uneven ground. This is a pretty flat garage, but chalk the wheels just in case. Going by the factory service manual, they say the first things you should do is break free these 4 bolts. 1, 2, and then 2 on the other side, 3, 4. They're a 14mm bolt, and as promised, I'm going to break these free with a breaker bar. I'm just going to break them free, not take them all the way out. That was pretty easy. It didn't take that much force with this breaker bar. So I think they're 59 foot-pounds is what it was. So they're coming loose very easily with this breaker bar. Okay, we're back. We just had to loosen the steering. It was locked in place, and that's why we couldn't get at that bolt. Simple thing to do, but... And so they're all broken free with a 14mm socket extension and about a foot and 18-inch breaker bar. And now the next thing the directions say to do is you got to remove the cotter pin for this outer tie rod, pull the cotter pin out, take the castle nut off, and then I'll show you with one of the pullers that I mentioned earlier how we're going to break this tie rod free without hammering on the steering knuckle. You don't have to do this if you have the right tools. Okay, so I'm just using a pair of dikes or wire cutters, and I'm going to try to get it. Can't get a grip on it. And just grab it and kind of lever it out. Okay, the cotter pin's out. And don't reuse these cotter pins. Put a new one in when you're ready to assemble everything. It's not a good idea to reuse these. The castle nut size for the outer tie rod is a 19mm. There we go. That's broken free. Okay. So that's free. Now we're going to get our puller and we're going to break this free. So you can see how the forks of this puller slide in between the boot and the steering knuckle. So I'm not going to do any damage to the boot by using this puller. And I'm also not going to hammer on this knuckle and mash it up. You can just tighten down on this rod. It puts pressure on the spindle of the tie rod and it breaks it free. Alright, cut. That's pretty good. So now outer tie rod is free from the steering knuckle. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the cotter pin out of the castle nut that attaches the ball joint to the lower control arm, break that free, and then again use another puller to break the ball joint free of the lower control arm. So just like on the tie rod, this is a cotter key, so I'm just bending it as straight as possible, and then I'm grabbing the end and pulling it out towards me. Okay. So that's out. It is a 24mm. Now this one is on there, I think at 105 foot-pounds, so I might have to go with the bigger breaker bar to break this free. Okay, there we go. So this is, I don't know how long, it's about a 2-footer. So if you are using any conventional tools, you either have to be stronger than I am, or you have to use a bigger breaker bar to get yourself more mechanical advantage to break it free. So now we have this castle nut off, and we're not going to reuse this because the new one comes with a new castle nut. We're going to get our pitman arm puller, slide it in here. Now with this one, it's not as crucial that you don't mash up the boot because we're replacing it, so not a big deal, but we're still going to pull it off with a puller instead of bashing on the lower control arm. There it goes. Sort of violent. Now it's free of the lower control arm, and we've already loosened these bolts. So now I'm just going to take my 1/2-inch drive with the, I should be able to just back these out by hand, yeah. And then I will be matching these bolts up with the other ones just to make sure they are the same bolt. There's one. Okay, now we just need to lift up on the upper knuckle, pull it out. So this is the old one. Now let's take it over to the bench and see if we could detect any play in this thing. So I've just decided to put this in the vise just to check to see if I can feel any movement. And I can't feel any play in this thing. It still feels pretty stiff. You know, it's got a pretty good resistance, so it feels fairly tight in the joint in there. The boot is still in good shape. There's a little bit of grease squeezing out there on the end, but I don't think that's a big deal. I mean, this thing feels like it probably could have lasted me longer, but like I said, this is just peace of mind, extra insurance that I'm not going to break a lower ball joint and be stranded somewhere. But I think I could have got a lot more miles out of this thing based off of what I'm feeling now. The only problem is some people didn't report any noticeable clunk or difference in the steering before theirs failed. I don't know if that's 100% true, but since I don't have any definitive information on this, like I said, I'm just going to replace it and for peace of mind. Okay, so anytime you're doing a replacement of parts, always good to match them up before you go and try to install them. And this looks like it's the exact one. The bolt pattern, you know, this nub here, it looks like it's the same exact one. Sleeves, they're in the same spot. So this looks to be a correct fit. And this looks different because as the weight of the truck goes down, it's going to push this boot down. So that's why that looks a little different. And here's the bolts. They look like they're the same height. And this also has these little notches. You can't really see them, but I could see it. The little, you can see it on the new one a lot easier. So it looks exactly like the same bolt. So the information I got on the forum was good information. These are the same bolt. Okay, we're ready to install the ball joint. So I'm just going to lift up a little bit. I think that's going to be enough to get them started here. I have to get underneath here. Oops. Make sure that you can start these by hand. You just want to avoid cross-threading. Okay, so one step that we're going to do, it's not necessarily a have to, but it's a nice to do, is we're going to use some thread locker, blue 242. It's not a real firm hold, they're just going to give some extra resistance to the bolt, so less chance of the bolt backing out. Put some Loctite on there. So that should be fine. This one looks like it's going to line up fine. Okay, that one's fine. Let's see if we can get the other one nut started. Okay, and those are all cinched up pretty good. We finally got all the bolts lined up. We got them cinched up but not torqued down yet. We had to jack up a little bit higher on the lower control arm. We're just going to get the castle nut started. And the service manual doesn't really tell you the steps putting it back together, but we're going to tighten. I'm going to torque the 4 bolts that hold it to the knuckle first, and then I'm going to torque the lower castle nut down second. The 4 ball joint bolts, again, is 59 foot-pounds. I'm using a torque wrench bought from CDI. It's made by Snap-on, but it's not the actual Snap-on brand, and I had to switch to a 3/8 because that's what size this is. You know, so I think it'd be better to get this on there, hooked up, locked in place. We're going to attach the tie rod, and just so we could lock the steering wheel and then get better. And I'll probably say this a million times, that try to tighten things down evenly. Don't tighten down one bolt all the way and then work on the other. So usually a crossing pattern. That clicked. That clicked. That clicked. And we'll just go one more time around just to make sure. So those are all torqued to 59 foot-pounds. In addition, we put a little bit of blue Loctite for a little extra insurance. Next thing we'll do is we're going to tighten this lower castle nut down to 105 foot-pounds. 105. Okay. Now I'm going to have to get with a bigger torque wrench. Okay, so switched over to a bigger torque wrench. The smaller one only went up to 100 foot-pounds, so I need to go to a bigger torque wrench that goes above 100. So this one is 105. Should have ate my Wheaties this morning. There we go. So, okay, 105 foot-pounds. Not too bad. We got to 105 foot-pounds, but you got to get to a point where your castle nut will line up with the hole for the cotter pin. So instead of going less, we chose to go a higher torque. And now the cotter pin's in there. We're going to bend it over the nut. So you just bend it back over like so. And you could bend the other side up too if you want a little bit. Alright, now we just got to get the tie rod torqued down the spec, and we'll be done with this side. And the tie rod again is 67 foot-pounds. So we're now tightening this one down with the 3/8 torque wrench again. Okay, and let's see if we got a... And the hole looks lined up, so we got lucky on that one. The cotter pin out this way, so instead of putting it from the back side, I'm going to put it in this way, so it'll be easier to get out if I ever have to do this another time. Okay, that's bent over. Bend the other side down a little bit. Okay. We are done with this side. We've got everything torqued down back in its original spot. And now we'll do the other side with the impact gun. We'll show you the difference. We're going to break the tie rod free first and then loosen the bolt. So we do the removal of the tie rod first so you could move things around easier. So now we're going to do it the method with the cordless impact. And we got to get the puller on there. If you're using one of these pullers, just make sure that you're between the steering knuckle and the boot of your tie rod, unless you plan on replacing your tie rod, and then you don't care if you mangle it. But I'm not replacing this. And you could use one of those pickle fork things, but that's definitely going to destroy your tie rod boot. So pullers are way better. And now it's free. Now we can move this thing around everywhere we want to loosen them up. So now we got the right socket, 14mm impact gun. This over a little bit. Okay, got them all loose. Now we're going to break free the lower castle nut. Get our puller on there. There we go. And we're going to just remove the rest of the bolts. Okay, this one's ready to come out. The passenger side one out, and we got the castle nut back. I'm just pulling on this thing, see if I can detect any slop. Feels just like the other one. It feels pretty darn good. So in case we didn't show you on the other side, we learned that you gotta jack up a little bit on the lower control arm to get the 4 bolts started a little easier. Okay, gotta get our bolts and our Loctite. Okay, there was no need to show you all the steps for the driver's side. So we got the driver's side ball joint in, we've got everything torqued to spec, cotter pins where they should be on the lower castle nut underneath the ball joint and on the tie rod. Now I started all the lug nuts by hand. I'm just going to cinch them up with this and then get the other side on the same way and then lower to the ground and torque them to spec. Okay. Get the other side on and then we'll lower it down. Okay, we're now torquing the lug nuts to spec. Some contradictory information in the factory service manual. I've read that some guys have seen that they say 85, 86 in different spots in the factory service manual, but 83, 85, somewhere in there is a good amount. Okay, that's good. They gave me 2 11s? They gave me 2 11s. 10, 11, 12. I just noticed that. They gave me 2 11s in this kit. Yeah, they gave me 2 11s. They didn't give me a 16.